Okay, we are live. I suppose you might as well see my face while I'm talking to you. Hi, everybody. Um, Welcome to Keeping the Beat, an engaging web series hosted live by TNMEA in partnership with the CMA Foundation. You can tune in to this series weeknights, Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Time to learn from and interact with music professionals from around the globe, representing every facet of the vast world of music. Today is, according to my script, Tuesday, May 5th. My name is Melanie Guerin. I am on the faculty of the Hartt School. I teach in music and music education and the theater divisions. Although I think last week we actually just got rid of the divisions, so I just teach in music and theater. Tonight's session is called "Building Better Humans Through Music." Um, it's a presentation I've given a couple of times before, although this will be the first time that I am doing so in yoga pants. So that's new. I encourage you to interact with me by replying to questions, replying to this live video stream. If you have questions and comments, I'm gonna talk at you some, and then I'll pause and ask you some questions for your ideas, and then feel free to ask questions as well. Um, I'll respond. We have a very high-tech system with Google Docs and all kinds of technology on my end. I'll respond as we go through this. Thanks very much to my moderator, Chelsea Jones, who's helping me out with this, who's the person who who invited me to do this presentation. So thanks very much, Chelsea. You're awesome. And I do have to give you all a disclaimer, which is that while this video is being streamed live, it will remain on the Keeping the Beat Facebook page for future reference. So your comments will also be part of that archive that will be on the internet forever. So, don't put anything on the internet that you wouldn't want to show your grandma. Okay, so let's get started here with my premise for sort of this whole presentation, which you should be able to see now. I believe that it is the mission of every educator to help students realize their greatest potential so that they may lead meaningful, satisfying lives. And I will fight you on that. This is the premise of everything. I'm assuming if you are interested enough in the title of this talk, Building Better Humans, that you probably believe me and agree with me on this. But it's important, I think, to kind of break this down and figure out and talk about what are implied, what are the implications in this statement. And I believe that there are two of them. One is that we value the gifts and needs of each individual student. If we are helping them reach their greatest potential, then we obviously have to believe that that potential is worth something. And the second is that we believe that what we teach has value, that what I'm doing will actually help my students reach their greatest potential. So we have to believe those two things. So something that I want to ask you first, my first question for all of you, is what does valuing the individual look like in your classroom? And I think you can answer this in two ways. You can answer it as an educator. What are the things that you do in your classroom to make every individual feel valued? And also as a student, and thinking back to some teachers that you might have had and how they made you feel valued. Here are some of my thoughts, and I'll read these, and then as the comments come in, I'll love to read your ideas as well. So celebrating individual differences as opposed to trying to make all of our students fit the same cookie cutter mold. Encouraging student choice and ownership, because when they have choice, they feel like their voices are valued. Valuing self-expression. I don't think you can say that you value individual voices if you don't let anyone talk in your band rehearsal. Now, obviously, there's classroom management issues there, but I have heard, I don't know any band teachers who run their classroom that way, but I have heard of that kind of a classroom environment, and I just think that's really tough. You can't really talk about music as self-expression if you aren't allowing that kind of self-expression in your classroom. Creating a safe and supportive environment. I'm sure that all of us as music teachers are doing this, but specifically for each individual, making sure it's a safe place for each individual, and that looks different for every kid. Developing a sense of trust, meaning they know that what you say you'll do, you will do. The routines and the things that that mean that your classroom is a safe place for them. Welcoming differing viewpoints. I promise I'm not just going to read this PowerPoint for this whole time. Encouraging and modeling a growth mindset, believing in and encouraging belief in students' potential. This is the big one. If they don't see that you believe in them, it'll be harder for them to believe in themselves. And providing relatable role models. And that means like representation is really important here. So I have some comments coming in. I want to share them. I'm excited about this. Catherine says, encouraging students to speak their opinions and musical voices in the classroom, right? Giving them some say in what happens on the day-to-day or maybe even the big picture. Chelsea says, incorporating students' musical tastes and cultures outside of the classroom is so important, right? So if you don't acknowledge that the music that they listen to outside of your classroom has value, then you're leaving that part of them outside and you're saying, well, there's this educational music that's good for you. And then all of those other parts of you are not important. Nick Mullins says, as an over talker, I loved getting to have my input in music classes growing up. Welcome, Nick. Yeah, so this idea of the music classroom, maybe more than even other classrooms, needs to be a place where students feel like they have a voice. Alexis says, I think student buy-in is very important. I ensure that my students have choice and honor that choice. Right, we keep seeing that idea of choice coming up, right? So giving students choices, letting them have opinions and valuing those opinions, not just by letting them speak those opinions, but letting that direct and guide some of your classroom activities. And then as we move on, and I'll definitely, if I move on before I've read your comments, I will certainly read them afterwards from the stream, and I'll try to respond to all of them. So we talk about valuing the individual, and now I want to talk about valuing the content, right? If I believe that the things that I'm teaching are going to help my students reach their greatest potential, like I said, that means that I think what I'm teaching is worthwhile for all of them, and that it's worthwhile for their individual goals. And that this is sometimes tricky because, and myself too, one of the good things I like about doing this presentation many times is that this is a topic that I feel really passionate about, and it's sort of my North Star that should guide all of my decisions. And like anybody else, I sort of can get caught in the weeds of the day-to-day and making assessments and making lesson plans. And so I like doing this talk every once in a while to remind myself of my own North Star and what are the things that I really that I'm aiming for. So I need to have a curriculum that is relevant to what my students want to be. And maybe what they want to be is not the most excellent sight reader or the most excellent flutist. And I have to value that, and I have to think, well, how can what I'm teaching be relevant to those goals? So it's very easy, and I actually should say, I didn't say at the top, while I teach college now, I was a public school educator for 11 years. This is my 4th year teaching at Hartt, but before that I was in public schools in the greater Hartford area, and I taught middle school, orchestra, band, general music. I did a theater program there, and then I taught at a high school and an arts high school, which I'll talk more about a little bit later. So it's really easy, and I guess I'm thinking mostly for secondary at the in this slide about, it's really easy for us to think about like, oh, you're in band. All of these skills are super relevant for you if you want to be a band teacher or you want to be a professional musician. I'm setting you up to audition successfully for a college program. I'm setting you up with the technical proficiency and the awareness of repertoire and all of those things. It's really easy for us to say, oh yeah, my curriculum's super relevant to those people. But what about everyone else? All of those other students who are going to go into all kinds of different fields. How can we make sure that we are helping them with those goals as well, not just our musical goals, but their personal goals? Um, and I would argue that there is something that all of these things have in common that we can address. Boom, look at that animation. They're all human. So that's what we actually need to use as our kind of guiding light, is how can I help my students all reach their greatest potential as human beings? And I think music is exceptionally well suited for doing that if we teach it with that in mind. So how is music relevant and important to every human? I would argue that it is about connecting, that music is about humans connecting with other humans. When I was teaching at my high school job, it was an arts academy, a magnet arts program in Hartford. And I taught all kinds of things. I taught music theory, I taught some performing ensembles, I taught a composition class one year, all kinds of things. And because it was a public school, there was not any kind of audition to get into the program. So in my junior year composition class, I had everyone from an all-state violist to a student who maybe had just transferred into the school that year, who had never taken any kind of music theory, who couldn't read music, who maybe could even barely match pitch. I had all of these students in the same class, and I had to think about what is the thing that I really want to teach them. I did a lot of thinking while I was teaching at that school about if I could only teach them one thing, or like what is the most important thing that I want them to leave with, because it didn't seem like, figuring out ABA form was going to be the most essential thing that I needed to get across. How could I serve all of them, and what was the most important thing? So here's my next question for you all is, if you could teach just one thing, if you or your students could leave your classroom with just one thing, what would it be? I started thinking about this when I was teaching at this school, and I kept going back and forth. I started thinking about it in terms of the whole school, and like, what is a school's job? What is the one thing that if the school could only teach the kids and they could leave with just one thing, what would it be? And I was like, well, maybe it should be reading. Maybe all students just need to be able to read, or maybe all students maybe they all need to be able to read and to do math. And then I started thinking, well, if one of them could read but also cared about other people, then that would mean that two of them could read. And if one of them could do math but cared about other people, then that one person who did math could help the others do math. So this was like several years of sort of spinning these ideas around in my head and thinking about what is the one thing that I want them to be able to do. And it really is, I think, caring about other people and caring about connecting with people. So how do we connect with people? I'm thinking about it like two directions. One is connecting with people by expressing ourselves, and we started talking a little bit about this, about our students' self-expression, right? And valuing that. So we want students to be able to express themselves. And then the other key, I think, is empathy, taking in the expressions of others and understanding it and relating to it. And again, I think that music is exceptionally well suited for covering both of these things. Yes, Catherine Sam, teaching people to be better and more empathetic people. You read my mind. I love that. And appreciation and love for music. I'm not going to discount that. That is an important part of what we teach. But I would argue that it's a step further than that, that it's like, well, what can music do for you? And again, I'm saying it can connect you to other people. So again, sort of this idea of, I'm going to help you be more fully human. A couple other comments that I'm seeing. Loving your song as you create it. And I don't know if Anthony is being like super deep about your song and what that means, like specifically a song that you're writing, or like your song as in the sound that you're putting out in the world, the art that you're putting out in the world. I think both could be true. Respect and love for themselves and for others around them. Thank you, Carrie. Yes, we're like on the same page about that. I just think if they can leave my classroom and my school with that, then we're okay. Because they can learn a lot of other things on their own if they are in an environment where they feel loved and cared for and they feel connected to other people. Great. So I'm going to get a little sciencey here because I am a nerd about that. And if we're going to talk about empathy, I want to make sure that I define what exactly it is that we're talking about. So here are a couple of definitions of empathy. I'm going to read them for you. Experiencing affect more appropriate for another person's situation than one's own. The ability to experience and understand what others feel without confusion between yourself and others. And a multidimensional construct comprising both cognitive and affective components. So those are a few definitions of empathy. And I want to explore there are some different dimensions of empathy. There are different ways that empathy sort of functions in our brains. One is the cognitive aspect, right? So like sort of intellectually processing someone else's feelings. The famous example of this, the famous test is the Sally Ann test. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. Basically, the idea is Sally has a basket and Anne has a box, and Sally has a marble and she puts it in her basket and then she leaves. And then Anne takes the marble and puts it in her box. And when Sally comes back, where is she going to look for the marble? So this is a test sometimes administered to kids, and the kids who have an awareness of someone else's perspective are aware that, well, the marble was moved when Sally wasn't there, so she doesn't know it's moved. So she's going to look in her basket first. And the students who don't have that ability to take someone else's perspective are going to assume that she's going to look in the correct place where the marble is in the box, right? So that's this idea of perspective taking. It's more of less of an emotional thing and more of an intellectual thing. When we get into the emotions, we're talking about the affective domain. So this is empathic concern, like I feel bad. I feel what someone else is feeling. I'm able to relate to that feeling. Maybe I actually experience that feeling. The danger of that is I might not want to help someone that I see in distress because I'm so upset about it. So on the other end, you need this thing called self-other differentiation, which is I see your feelings, but I'm not overwhelmed by them. I'm still willing to help because I know that those are your feelings and they're not mine. And I have an example for this, which is, so this is me and my two sisters. I am the crying one in the back, and little Melanie used to do a lot of crying on special occasions, when people were taking pictures. And of course, when I was little and I used to cry all the time, I don't know that I could have articulated why I was crying. I was just crying. I was just upset. And I can look back now, and I don't think my mother will mind me saying this, but now as an adult, when I see our family getting ready for a big event and I see how anxious my mom gets, I can imagine being very small and sensing that anxiety and having some empathy and sensing that anxiety, but not being able to differentiate from her feelings from my own, and not being able to separate that anxiety and say, well, she's really stressed out, but I'm just getting my picture taken. I don't need to be stressed out, right? So this is this idea of self-other differentiation. The third dimension of empathy is the motor dimension, and that has to do with actually imitation. People who have higher empathy we all tend to imitate each other. You know, like I'm sure some of you have experienced hanging out with someone that has a different accent than yourself, or a very particular speech pattern, and you find yourself picking it up, right? We tend to imitate each other. And imitation and mimicry is associated with liking. So, you know, they do these experiments where you're in a room with someone and the other person mimics when you cross your legs, when you cross your arms, when you scratch your ear or your face or whatever. And they found that the person that was mimicked more reported liking the other person more. So this is another way that we sort of subconsciously connect with each other. So now, if only there were a subject in school that could cover the cognitive and the affective and the motor domains, if only. A little bit about the brain. This is my Dr. D. Hansen slide because she was one of my professors in grad school, and she loves a good brain reference. So you'll have to excuse me. I can pull up my notes on this because it's been a while since I did this actual research. I will share a reference list at the end of this talk in case you're interested in actually reading some of the brain studies. But just here's some fun brain facts. Perspective taking is correlated with better interpersonal skills and higher self-esteem. The ability to take someone else's perspective actually is correlated with higher self-esteem for yourself. That's redundant. Self-esteem for yourself. It's okay. Moving on. Thicker tissue and denser neural connections in this right temporoparietal junction. Don't I sound smart? So more stuff in there, more neurons, more connections in there is correlated with less intergroup bias, meaning less preference for the people who are like me over the people who aren't like me. I don't know if you can like sort of imagine hypothetically if there were like groups of people that tended to have really strong biases against other groups of people. If you can just like sort of imagine what that would be like. I don't know if you can think of any examples in your life. And this area, this little circled area here is also associated with being selfless and having self-control. And I love this thought about self-control as actually a way of being selfless. It's like you're thinking about your future self and you're being considerate of your future self. So this is where we think empathy lives in the brain, or at least where we thought it lived in the brain a year or so ago when I made this PowerPoint. Okay, so like I said, we're looking for maybe a school subject where students can engage the cognitive domain and the affective domain and the motor domain. That's my favorite slide. So I would argue, and that's my Warren Hastings slide, another of my grad school professors who often talks about the value of music being that it touches on all of those domains. So when we're talking about connecting, if connecting with others requires honest self-expression and empathy involves the cognitive, affective, and motor domains, and music engages all three of those domains, and we can be self-expressive with doing music, then maybe learning music can help us connect with each other. That's the idea here. So I want to talk about this and make a real big point here that what I'm not saying is if you study music, you will be more empathic and you will be able to express yourself. I think that's a platitude, and that's not actually true unless we are directly teaching these things and we're making it a point of the curriculum. I think it's a cop-out to say that music helps you express yourself if you are only ever letting students play the music that was created by someone else. That's a cool act of connecting too. I'm connecting to that composer and I am helping that composer get their ideas out. That's super powerful. But if students are never actually expressing themselves through their music, if they're always just recreating someone else's self-expression, I would argue that we can't really claim that we're helping them express themselves. And that's where you get this conversation about why are all these kids who are playing music in their garages with their friends on the weekends, like why don't they want to be in band? Why aren't they in choir if they love music so much? And so many students do love music, but don't necessarily participate in our sort of traditional ensemble programs. So I'm saying not that these things are side effects that will just automatically happen if you teach music or if you study music, but I'm saying that music is an exceptionally well-suited vehicle for teaching these things if we mindfully do so. The people that we're connecting when we're making music are the composer, and I probably should have said creator, right? The creator of the music, the performer of the music, and the listener. This is who we want to be connecting. So how do we do that? Another question for you all is how do, as composers, as performers, how do we connect to the people who created the music if it's not us ourselves? How do we connect with audience members? What are the things that we can do? What are the things that we can teach our students to do that can help them feel like, I really do feel like music is a social activity. But so often I think we forget to talk about that with our students. Again, and I'm guilty of it too. We get so caught up in the nuts and bolts and the day to day that I think we forget that we're playing music for people, and we should care about the people that we're playing for, and we should care about the people whose music we're playing, and we should try and understand what it is that they were trying to communicate to the audience and what they're trying to communicate to us through their notation or through their lyrics, maybe. I think these are important things. I don't think we always talk about them because we're just like trying to get the concert up. So think about that. And if you have some ideas about how do we do this as performers, share them in the comments. Some ideas from me. Acknowledging the audience. Collaborating with other performers, just playing chamber music is the most obvious example, but even in a choir or a big orchestra, even in a large ensemble, there's an element of collaborating with each other. Again, if in our classrooms we let that happen. Conveying the composer's intent. How often do we stop and talk about, why do you think the composer wrote that way? Why are the dynamics this way? What does this symbol mean? What does this expression marking mean? A little easier in a choral setting where you have lyrics and you can really talk about what the lyrics mean. All right, I have some comments coming in I want to read here. Edward says, interpretation, especially with solos. Contact the composers if they're living and chat about the music. Oh yes, let's perform the music of living composers, and then let's talk to them because they're real people, not just names on a piece of paper. Catherine, expressing the music with your facial expressions and your body movement. As a conductor, sometimes I feel as much part of the music as my students, so I move and dance a bit with them. Yes, I love that. And that's me as the conductor, right? That's us as teachers connecting with students through that through our body language, through that nonverbal communication. But also a lot of times the role of the conductor is that visual that helps audiences sort of understand what's going on. I think there's a lot to be said for audience members who maybe don't have the musical sophistication to understand what they're hearing, but the conductor can serve as a visual aid in a way. Nick says, as a performer myself, it's so powerful to share your heart with an audience and truly feel them give it back to you. Right. How can we get our students to feel that in our concerts? To feel the energy coming back at them and to know that they are responsible for that energy. Can we talk in our rehearsals about, like, we think the composer of this piece wanted people to feel joyful. How can we get the audience to feel that joy? How will we know if they feel it or not, right? This is all about just like, to me, it's like getting out of your own head and really communicating with other people. Both I'm singing to you, but I'm also watching your eyes and I'm trying to gauge your reaction. Awesome. These are great ideas. Thank you for the comments. Okay, next is how do we connect as listeners, right? So if I'm thinking of this in terms of national standards like create, perform, respond, we talked a little bit about performing, and I have some specific class activities to talk about a little bit later, but now I'm an audience member or I'm in a music classroom and I'm doing a listening exercise. How can I connect to either the performers of that music or the people who created that music if that's not the same person or people? What are ways that we connect as listeners? And you can shoot some comments as I'll tell you the right answers. No, I'm just kidding. My answers. Listening analytically, really breaking down what are the sounds that I'm hearing. I think it's a great exercise to have students listen to different interpretations of the same piece. How are they different? Do we think one is more like what the composer intended? Or is it purposely different than what the composer intended? And we can talk about like covers of pop songs in that regard. Is this cover totally changing the song, or is there some seed that still remains? What do we think the composer, the original songwriter, might think about that song? Interpreting the intent of the performer as well as the composer, the creator, and making personal associations. I love this one. This idea of this music reminds me of some memory that I have, or it brings an image to mind. There's just because that's personal doesn't mean that that's not connecting to the music. That's like how I can feel something about the music. Chelsea says, I really connect to the body language and the facial expressions of performers. Yeah, so I guess I should say not just listeners, but viewers of music, because there is definitely a visual element to listening to a performance. Or if you're just even listening to a recording, I don't know about you, but sometimes I picture the performer and how they must look. Oh, comment from Ashley. Hi, Ashley. Thanks for watching. As an elementary educator, how do you convey the importance of the music curriculum to a regular classroom teacher? Yeah. So this is sort of my whole thesis statement here is if I can teach music in a way that improves the lives and enhances the humanity of my students, it will be self-evident what our purpose is. If I focus, and I don't mean at all to go against the idea that like music for music's sake, that music is valuable, and I am teaching music. I'm not teaching language arts. I'm not teaching these other subjects. I am teaching music because music is valuable. But I think the reason music is valuable is because it connects us, right? So how can we get that classroom teacher to feel connected to other people through music, to our kids, right? This is how I'm thinking of it. It's like one step beyond music for music's sake. It's like music for humanity's sake, sort of. Ooh, I need to write that down. Nick says, I love hearing what my students think about a piece before I tell them anything about it. Yeah, just that free, open-ended response. They always come up with creative things. Yes, awesome. Edward says, I like to listen to recordings in the dark with the eyes closed. Same, Edward. I like to lie on the floor. I don't know why. Lie on the floor in the dark with my eyes closed, totally. Shutting out with a visual sense that heightens the oral sense. Yeah, totally. Catherine says, I try to listen to as much of a variety of musical genres as I can, understanding how various types of music have changed our modern music. Yeah, just like the history. And again, like you're connecting with the past in that way. You're connecting with other people in other times and places. Awesome. And then this last idea is, how do we connect as composers, again, as creators of music? How are we connecting with the performers and the listeners? So on a very sort of mundane technical level, well, we have to communicate to the performers what we want the music to sound like, and we use notation for that. But also maybe as a creator, maybe I am making music that expresses something of myself, and so I'm putting myself out there for other people. Maybe I'm using music to represent something, an event, something that I care deeply about. And then this idea of, I have an image in my mind, I'm going to write down this notation or create a recording to share with you in the hopes that maybe in your mind you will have the same or a similar mental image. So I think I already talked a little bit about this. I'm going to give you a couple examples of things that I have either done or I thought about doing as soon as I left public education and I had the brain space to think about creative lesson plans. Some great ideas that maybe you can try. So this is one that I actually did do. Thinking about, as a performer, how can I connect to a composer, and thinking about, I think someone actually wrote this comment about like having the students make some interpretive decisions. I had two clarinet teachers, one in high school and one in college. My high school clarinet teacher taught me musicality by modeling, and he would just play it. I would play it how he did it, and then I sounded like I was really expressive. And that was one way, and that worked for when I was in high school. When I was in college, my college teacher never played it for me, never told me how it went, but we analyzed melodies and we analyzed rhythms and we analyzed harmonies and made decisions based on that. Now that works better for my sort of analytical type A brain. I think it's worthwhile to have those conversations with students. So one thing that I used to do with students is take a recording of a professional musician and talk about what they were doing that went beyond the notation. So I'm just going to play you this little example here. So we would talk about the fact that this violinist is not playing those even eighth notes even, right? Stressing some, making a big deal of the big leaps in the melody. And then we talk about how does that change the piece? I was thinking as I was prepping this about how I can, about how a lot of these ideas actually might be great for our current situation where we maybe can't be playing together anymore, but we're doing more listening activities and we're doing more talking about music. I think a lot of these, well, I hope a lot of these will be useful for you in that situation. All right, here's one that was super fun. Actually, this could be, if you're doing synchronous instrumental classes, this could be really fun. You'd have to make different versions for different instruments and clefs and whatever. But so I used to make a sheet of short melodies like this, all sight readable by anyone in the class, or maybe differentiated by levels. And then I'd have a stack of index cards. Obviously, you can't do index cards if you're doing your class over Google Meets or what have you, but you can maybe write them down or whatever. So students would quickly learn how to play this melody, and then they would draw a card, and the card might have a stylistic instruction. It might just say staccato. It might say forte. It might say one big crescendo, or it might have something more creative. It might say like a circus, or like you are in the middle of a dark forest. I let the students make up titles, like random titles for pieces. The most famous one that they joked about for years was "Look, a tree." I don't know what that means. But again, I'm valuing the self-expressions of my students, so I want their ideas, right? So the students would draw it. They would play this melody in whatever way their card indicated, and then the rest of the class would talk about what did they just hear, what do they think might have been on that person's card, right? These activities that show us that we aren't glued to the notation, that there is something human that we add to the notation to make it alive. I think this is really important, and I think it's something that I know I didn't spend a lot of time doing until later in my career, when I started thinking about these things, about like, how can I just teach humans to be more human, because that really is my goal. So those are just a couple of like talking about interpretation performing activities. So now we talk about, I said before, a lot of our performing is performing music that wasn't created by our students. It's performing other people's music. And is there a way that performing the music of other people can become an exercise in empathy? You will probably guess that my answer to that is yes, I believe that there is. I want to talk about this book by a colleague of mine at the Hartt School, Tracy Moore. She's a fantastic acting teacher. And I don't know that many music teachers would necessarily look in an acting textbook. It's not really a textbook. It's a little lighter than that. But I think this would be especially great for choral teachers to take a look at. Some of the things that that Tracy talks about in this book are specific. It's aimed for musical theater performers. So and a lot of what musical theater performers do is they take the text, they take the written notes, they take the notation, all that information, and then they have to figure out what it all means, how they can feel it, and then how they can convey it to an audience. So one of the sections of the book is about personalization, like how can I make these lyrics meaningful for myself? When is a time that I have had this particular feeling, so I can recall that and I know what it feels like? another activity, what would the person singing this song perceive with their five senses? So I think this could be a really cool activity to do in a choral setting where you're looking at the lyrics. I remember when I was teaching the high school, to try and get the kids to feel something when they were singing sometimes came so easily to them if it was music that they just naturally connected with. And sometimes it was really, really difficult. And I think stopping and talking about this, about what was the creator, what was the composer, what was the lyricist feeling or wanting the audience to feel, and really trying to connect to that emotionally, I think it's so valuable, not just for in a musical theater context, but in any context where you're trying to recreate something that was in someone else's head. So I highly recommend this book, available on Amazon, I believe. Just a really great read to start your brain thinking about, and of course, if you teach musical theater in any way, shape, or form, it's excellent for that as well. But I highly recommend this for choral teachers and maybe even instrumental teachers. You know, there aren't lyrics, but there's still feelings in there, and a lot of the music is about something, and we want them to connect in that way. How can performing the music of other cultures become an exercise in empathy? So what I'm asking is, can we go beyond we're doing a multicultural piece because we're checking the box of multiculturalism, or, because we really care about representation and because we really want our students to have a wide variety of experiences with music, but how can we really try and make it an exercise in empathizing with the people who created the music? Can we talk about why that music was created? And can we, again, going back to the Acting the Songbook, can we personalize those feelings on some level, and relate it to something that we can connect to, so that not only are we performing this music that's maybe not from my culture, maybe I don't understand it fully, but can I perform it in a way that honors the creators? I see some comments, so I'm going to stop and look. The use of Bob Dylan in the recent image. He was an expert in giving a voice to those that couldn't. Yes. Yes, Bob Dylan is a storyteller. And I love this idea of using music to tell stories. All right, another book that I just found mind-blowing. And again, it's a theater book, but I felt like I learned a lot as a music educator from reading this book. This is by Dorothy Heathcote. I learned about this from my friend Jackie Hubbard, who's the director of the Ivoryton Playhouse down in Essex in Connecticut. This was her teacher. Dorothy Heathcote was an applied theater teacher, meaning she used theater, she used drama to help students. Essentially, all she was doing was these exercises in empathy. And she would basically role play with them in a long-term project, like maybe a whole week of role playing and developing a world for the students to live in, mostly guided by them. And then when they all had bought into this world, she would do what she called dropping to the universal, where she would then talk about some big concept that like all of us can relate to. So for example, they're doing a role play where they're on a ship, maybe they're pirates on a pirate ship or something. And then once the students have all bought in through some ritual and some artifacts and creating this world, then she would say, so why do you think these pirates would keep going out to sea even when it was really difficult to leave their families or something? Just thinking about connecting the role play that they were doing to these sort of universal human feelings and experiences. So taking a music spin on that, these questions that we want to ask are, what are the universal ideas you can find in a particular piece of music that you're studying? How is the person who created this music like me? And that might take some digging because it might seem on the surface like they have nothing in common with the students. What did it feel like to create this music? Again, just really trying to connect and empathize with the creators of the music. I love this book, and I have to read it 10 more times before I can even absorb all of the brilliance in it. It's just fantastic. Okay, this is tube and throat singing. Which I did not know much about Tuvan throat singing. And that slide goes out to Damon Postal, who I totally think should do one of these sessions, because he, as far as I know, he's like the American who knows the most about Tuvan throat singing, or I guess Tuvan music in general, and in the world of music education. So I'm going to recommend that he check this out and do a session for you all. So in that clip, you heard some percussive sounds that sort of sounded like galloping horses, and you heard a combination of low and high sounds. And I'm going to sort of get this wrong, I'm sure, but if you think about that music and the people that music came from, the Tuvan people, their lives revolve around nature. So the galloping sounds is like the horses that are part of their culture. And Damon explained this to me a couple years ago, and again, I'm going to get it wrong, but the low sounds, the low vocals combined with the high vocals is sort of a representation of the space that the mountain takes up between the earth and the sky. So basically, this music represents the world that the Tuvan people know, this nature and this environment that they live in. So if I'm thinking about how can I connect to that, I want to think about how is the music that I make representative of my world? This universal truth, right? If we're thinking back to Dorothy Heathcote, this universal truth that's represented by this music is that people make music to represent things that are important to them. I think anybody can understand that, right? So again, here's like an activity that you could do in class, asking students, what are the objects, what are the things that define my personal environment, whether it is literally the four walls of my living room and this laptop that I have been yelling at essentially for a month because I cannot seem to keep my voice under control when I'm talking over Zoom. But what are the objects that define my environment? And if I were to create music that represented my environment, what would have to be in there? And then how might I represent those musically? And this can be a hypothetical conversation, but it could also be an actual composition activity that students could do. How can you create music that represents your environment? And in doing that, now can you understand the people who created that Tuvan music? Can you understand them a little bit better? Do you feel a little bit more connected to them now that you have thought about how you might do the same thing? I'm going to skip this one because I want to get to questions, and I want to skip to a super fun activity that I came across as I was prepping this, and it's just really sweet. And I know a lot of us miss the sounds of our students' voices singing together. Wow, unexpectedly emotional about that. Today was my last day of teaching, and I'm not going to see my kids for a while. So this is an activity that I did with a summer camp with middle school students. You might know this Mozart canon, maybe. It's a pretty easy tune, and I think this is the one that also has a version that is highly inappropriate. Thanks, Mozart. This is the G-rated version. But at my summer camp, the students were divided into 4 teams, and they were each team was identified by a different color. And so I had the students learn the canon, and each team wrote their own lyrics to this canon. And then at the end of the camp, we sang them all together with all 4 colors. But each set of lyrics was about their particular color. And this was very much the students' creation. But this is, again, another example of them understanding that the music that they make can represent them. So for just the most adorable thing that you may have heard today, I'm going to play this for you. And you can hear them like laughing at their own jokes. And it's like, if you teach middle school, I think you'll recognize these are very middle school lyrics.
Golden power of the sunshine, digging in a giant gold mine, a pot of gold, a garden soul, them golden French fries are so fine. You use your gold to buy some eat some pie. At the Olympics, sports teams win the prize. At the Olympics, sports teams win the prize. Medals, trophies, gold medals are so shiny and so cool. We're marching on a golden day. In Canada, they all say A, golden day. Say A, bacon and daffodils.
Does it get any better than that? It's like that was that group of kids, bacon and daffodils. I could not have written a song that ended bacon and daffodils, and I don't think Mozart could have either, but they did. And they have this memory of this song that belonged to them. So maybe they have a little better understanding of how another composer might have written music that represented them. Those were my favorite days ever of teaching. So thinking about other composition activities, again, these universal, why do people make songs about unhappy things? Why do we like listening to sad music? Can you write a blues lyric about something that made you sad? We write music about things that make us feel things. How do people represent themselves through music and art? A very small activity, just set your name to a rhythm. Then maybe you can add some pitches, something that expresses yourself. Maybe a little bit more advanced. Borrow one element from 3 of your favorite songs and then use them to create a new piece. That's like a big task for some kids, and for some kids they would love the opportunity and they would leap at it. But maybe all of the elements are, well, I really like this song because it's loud, and so whatever I create is going to be loud, right? I see there's a couple comments, so let me not neglect them. Carrie says, I love doing world music with my elementary school students. They connect to it so quickly. Ethnomusicology, yay. I know, Alexis, I played that song today just as like, oh, I remember this. And I was like, I have to include it because, yeah, we just miss the sound of our kids. Chelsea is asking me a question. Do you think your research in empathy is what has drawn you to musical theater? I totally love this medium because it seems to emote so many shared humanistic feelings. Yeah, I think so. I feel, even though I'm working in theater and I'm a music director and I do all this theater, I really do think the reason I'm in musical theater is because it is all about connecting. It's like all we do every day is talk about how can you connect more to this character? How can you be clearer about what you're trying to convey to the audience? And I think that is sort of why I ended up, these two things sort of converged, right? So I decided that when I'm teaching music, what I really want to be doing is teaching people to connect. And I love theater, and it's like just a great way to do that. This is an activity that I never got to do, but I think it would be super cool. So if you ever do it, you should tell me how it goes. Compose a short piece that uses musical elements to represent a concept. And by short piece, it's like, could be 15 seconds, right? And imagine the conversations you could have with even little kids about like, what would music that represents night sound like? Maybe night is a scary thing. Maybe night is a safe thing. Maybe night is the time that you see your mom when she comes home from work. And so night is associated with something special. Maybe night is when you watch your favorite TV show, right? And think about how we can get to know our kids in a way that they're expressing themselves through music. I should say, I forgot to mention, but maybe one of my assistants here, Alexis or Chelsea, you can put my website in the comments just so people can contact me after this. I would love to hear from you if you try any of these activities, if you want to just talk about it and nerd out about empathy and music more in the future. It's www.melaniebguerin.com. I don't have a ton of questions about this, but I mean, I don't have a ton of answers, but I do have sort of further questions. And if I was going to do a research study, these are some of the things that I might want to think about is, can we develop objectives like for this connecting and empathy? How would we assess it? Can we transfer, and I'm obviously all of my thinking is assuming, yes, that this could transfer outside of the music classroom. I do think it would take a lot of practice. I don't think you can do one little empathy activity and then all of a sudden your kids are nicer. I think it has to become a practice. How can we help students to apply this listening and connecting with other people outside of our classrooms? I think I've already said, I think the implications for advocacy are music helps people be better people. And something that does that is the value of that is self-evident. And then what are the implications for the objectives that we're already using in our classrooms and, the very valuable technical skills and music literacy skills that we're already teaching? I think we have 4 whole minutes left. If there are questions, and I'll give you the lightning version of this reference list just to know that this will be shared so you can check out any of these, any of my sources. Again, those books that I shared, Tracy Moore, Acting the Song, Dorothy Heathcote, I forget what it's called, but it's red. And Damon Postal, who I am going to contact and see if he'll present one of these because he knows so much about Tuvan music, that I think he would be a great resource for that. There's this lag, and I was about to do the thing do you have any questions? And then awkwardly wait for it. And I'm doing that now because I don't have anything more to say. But I am so grateful for Chelsea inviting me to do this talk and spreading the gospel of empathy and connecting with people. And the other videos, I've watched several of them, and they're great, and you can check them out on the Keeping the Beat Facebook page. They're all archived there, so there's so many. And I watched Glenn Adsitz from last week because he was my teacher, and hopefully he will see this and see this connecting, because he talked a lot about teaching humans, teaching people rather than teaching music. And Jason Karen, oh, blast from the past. Nice to see you. Thanks for tuning in. So yeah, check out those other videos. I have my little script for the end of the video that I will read. Because in addition to checking out those older videos, you can tune in weeknights, Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m. That's Central Time. I don't know about you, but I'm getting real good at time zones because I have students all over the world right now, and I'm trying not to teach them when they're in the middle of the night. So Monday through Thursday, same time that this just started, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern. You can watch these live. Tell your friends all about it. And I apologize that I did not look at who's coming up this week, but I'm sure they're great, so you should watch that. And if you're watching this and you think you might have something that you would want to share, you send your applications to tnmea.org. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you TNMEA and Chelsea and Alexis for helping me out and doing this over Zoom so I didn't have to learn all of that other technology that was stressing me out about having to learn it. I think this worked well. So thanks, and good luck to all of you who are in the trenches and doing this crazy online teaching, and you're doing it for your kids. And I was just telling my colleague today, she was a little dispirited about not getting a lot of buy-in for her kids. She's like, oh, I spent all this time making this great lesson and only 3 or 4 kids signed in. And I just said to her, it might have been the best part of the day for those 3 or 4 kids. So just remember that if you are getting discouraged about how hard this is, it might be the thing that's keeping one of your students going. So carry on. Good luck with the rest of the year, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep making music. And contact me through my website if you want to chat some more about this. All right. Bye, everybody.